Welcome, Shahana. So nice to see
Thank
you.
you so much, Rohini.
So, Shahana, you know that this conversation is going to be taking a very small and specific aspect of your life. So, we're not really going to be talking about your whole life story, but really want to delve deep into a particular part of your life that you feel, happy to talk about. So, to start with, I want to ask you, what is the trigger or experience or event in your life that you feel changed something for you and it made you see your life in a different light, and maybe perhaps you chose different things for yourself? What would that be?
Um, so I think that when I was growing up, I was very much the obedient child and obedient student, and I've always done what was expected right up to my first job. And when I started working in my first job, it's is when I realized that all throughout, I mean, I enjoyed being a student. There's not that much of pressure, and I liked it. And but when I started working, I realized, life is serious, and I have to do this for the next 40, 50 years. And I was earning, coming from an IIM, you in your first job, coming from a middle class family, you find yourself suddenly at the age of 22, 23, earning more than what my parents were earning at the time of their retirement. So it was all very exciting. But then I sat down and thought, look, I have to do this for the next 40 years. And it dawned upon me that money is not going to be enough to keep me happy and satisfied. And I started questioning all these accepted norms of what is success and what is happiness and what kind of job is coveted and desired. And I started questioning that who's made all these rules and do these rules really apply to me? There's nothing wrong in those rules, but they're not the rules that I have made for myself, and they were not working for me. I was feeling very miserable and unfulfilled professionally. And I think so that's probably a defining moment when I started realizing that other things make me happy, and there's no shame at all in accepting that what makes you happy is different from what all your other friends and peers and everybody that you know, and the children of the friends of your parents, all those success stories that you keep hearing that you're supposed to emulate. Mine is different, and as long as it makes sense to me, I should follow it, even if it may not make sense to others.
So,
So that was a defining moment.
so you were quite young when you came to that
Yeah,
realization. How were you in your
I
sort of
was. I
20
was.
early 20s?
I was what, 2005. So yeah, 26 odd when I, finally decided to do something very drastic professionally. I was young, yes. In hindsight, one can credit it to wisdom coming early, or other way around is to that it is the age to do stupid things and experiment and not have, responsibilities, children. So you could take chances.
Yeah.
And also, I think for me, what was a very big factor was that my husband happened to be working in the same organization that I was in. So every day we would go to work unhappy, and we would carry that unhappiness back home in the evening and discuss it. So if he wasn't there to also, I could make my plans with him, so to say, and he was, forget about being supportive, it was our plan together. It was like, planning a baby kind of a thing, that kind of support. So that is the other reason why I could make that decision very early. One,
Yeah.
because I was pretty reckless, and two, because my husband was there by
So,
my side.
so there's lots of things that I want to ask you questions on, because I feel
Sure.
like this is such a pivotal thing that you've touched upon. So you grew up in a fairly sort of family that valued education, and
Very
I'm
much.
guessing you were quite good in academics. So did you feel like an implicit expectation, or was there a specific
Yeah,
kind of?
there was. It was very soft, and the good thing was that I enjoyed studies, so that it wasn't a pain for me. But I was, yeah, there wasn't any other option that was even remotely available for me. And in those days, our awareness levels were also lower. And to add to that, I was the younger sibling, and I, the typical, do everything that your elder sister has done, but a little better, that kind of thing. But it was very soft. I mean, I'm very grateful to my parents, because if they had not inculcated in me the love for academics, I wouldn't be where I was. But yeah, it was there. I can't blame them also, because their world is also very limited. It was, those
Sure.
days, this was the pattern that one took, and from where would they get other ideas? And they just wanted the best for me. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's how it
and so
was.
you then did your MBA from IIM, one of the top business
Yeah.
schools in India. So I guess again there was this sort of almost like a path that you felt everyone had to follow, and
Yes. And
initially you did that. Yeah,
actually, I would say that I did my MBA from a B school with very little vision of what it's all about. Honestly, I was starstruck maybe because I hadn't expected to clear the written exam and get admission. So it was all like this big honeymoon, but I wasn't looking beyond the honeymoon, honestly. And it was a huge difference in the way in the whole education was so different. So yeah, I mean, it's not my parents, it was me also. I was just walking in blind without any realization of what I was myself when I did my MBA.
yeah. And then you talked about your husband. So did you meet your husband during your MBA days, or
No,
did you
I met him
work?
just, I met him, we both joined the same organization together from campus. He had also done his MBA. So we were management trainees together. That's how I met him.
Right. And I find that with a lot of couples, that vision of what they want to do, over the next 20, 30 years isn't always discussed early on. They
Yeah.
maybe they discover it once they've got married, and sometimes they realize they have completely different visions. So can you tell us a bit about you and your husband? At what point did you
I don't
realize?
think I would have, I
Yeah.
don't, it might have been that we wouldn't have gotten married if I wasn't so miserable in my job, actually. And we hadn't talked about it, because that's how the whole relationship started. He was just a colleague for me, and we had met for a grand total of 2 days during our initial training together. And then he was working in another city, and I was working in another city, but we kept in touch. So practically every night at 8 o'clock, I would call him up and sob on his shoulder on how I was not making head or tail of my job and expectations. And he was a huge, uh, he was like a rock for me at that time. So definitely we were slowly unraveling it all out in our talks.
Yeah.
And while he wasn't certainly as emotionally upset as I was, he was pretty cheerful about it. But we were discovering, it was a period of discovery where we did realize that there were the same common things that we did not like, and there were the same common things that we wanted from our careers. So it was a very important part of our pre-marriage, you can say our courtship, talking about our professional goals,
Yeah.
which eventually led to our marriage. It was very much there. And I think that was something that I really wanted to be sorted out before we got married, because I saw that there were so many couples for which this was a bit of an issue after marriage. Not just, I mean, working in different cities and one spouse having to maybe compromise on the career because of the other spouse. Many such things are there. So to whatever extent possible, I did want these things to be discussed before marriage. Not
Yeah.
very romantic, but it was important for me.
And I think that probably formed a very solid foundation for your
Yes, because
future
we
relationship.
realized that we have these things in common. It was
Yes.
very important for me.
So can you maybe tell us what was it specifically that you didn't like about working? Was it the job? Was it the notion of working in a sort of rat race situation?
Yeah.
Or what specifically was it
Yeah,
that?
it was just a marriage that was incompatible. Nothing wrong on both sides. I but I was, as you rightly said, one is that that rat race never appealed to me. So there was this constant pressure of not, I wasn't afraid of performing, but the constant pressure of being seen. The perception has to be there that you're performing. There was constant pressure of having to create an impression that you're married to your desk and you have to sit there till 11 in the night working hard. And I saw the reality behind it. It wasn't as if the work really needed you to be staying there till 11 in the night, but you had to create that perception. And I was never very good at this perception management. And I would do my work and I would want to just, maybe spend time with friends and then go home. So I never understood that culture. That was one issue. And the other issue was that I wanted to believe very much in whatever um, product or service I was involved in, and I wasn't able to believe that much in that product. It did not. I wasn't passionate about it. It
Yeah.
was a product, but my work for me has to be something that I can be passionate about, and that wasn't possible.
Yeah.
And reason number three was I was trying to look 5 years, 6 years into the future, and trying to look at how to raise a family with this kind of a job. And I just wasn't seeing the sense of it. Some people are able to do a brilliant job, Rohini, of balancing, but I am probably a lazier kind of person. So I felt that I needed at some point to move to a life where there's not just more child time or husband time, but much of me time as well, right? So all those things were
So,
there.
so you and your husband jointly made that decision to quit
That's
that
right.
rat race. So
Right, right.
tell us now what you actually decided to do. Were you quite clear on what it is that you wanted? Now you
We
knew
were
what
quite
you
clear. We
wanted.
were making plans, like you said, it was part of our courtship
Yeah.
talk, that we were making all these plans, plotting and planning all throughout. So by the time we quit, we didn't know clearly what we wanted to do. We wanted to get into the training space, the education space, and we were talking to people. But having said all that, when we quit, we didn't have a job in hand, or we didn't have an offer in hand, and we had very little money to start something on our own. So, but like I just said, the 20s is a lovely time to be reckless and stupid. You do all these stupidities before you get your white hair, so people forgive you, and you can fight with your parents. My parents were, shocked out of their wits. That who leaves a job like this, right? As far as they were concerned, this was sheer stupidity. But in your 20s, you have the energy to fight with them and basically convince them that look, it's going to work out. So we did all that, and finally we managed to meet some wonderful people, really wonderful people who have mentored us to this date. They are our mentors, who gave us the guidance, who gave us the opportunity and the franchise to open a training center in Bhopal and Indore for entrance exams preparation. And that's what we've been doing for the last 16 years now.
Wow. So in terms of then, you know, the most rewarding moment, because 16 years is clearly a long enough time for you to feel that, yeah, this is really working. So can you think of sort of a, especially in your early years when maybe things were not so obvious that it was all going to work out, can you remember sort of a really rewarding moment that made
Of course
you
I can. I am a person who gets happy with small things, and I get these small rewarding moments every now and then, which makes it all worthwhile. So for me, for anybody in the education space, maybe the most rewarding thing is when a student comes up to you and shares a moment of success, or just remembers you. So when we have our former students who are doing very well, they settle all over the world, and they just send a birthday greeting or a festival greeting, or they mention somewhere that we were instrumental, that means so much. It's priceless. And the other thing is, I live in a city which is a tier 2 city in India. Both are We have offices in both two cities in Madhya Pradesh, which are both tier 2 cities. A lot of the students that we interact with have faced a lot of challenges, Rohini. Some things which probably I cannot really put myself in that place. The challenges when they were growing up, the schooling was not so good, or the mindset of people as far as the girls were concerned. There were so many challenges, that financial challenges. Um, to see somebody like that coming with all those challenges, many of the students are uh, they have never spoken in English before they join us. I'm not saying that speaking in English is a very big success story, but I'm just saying that we get to see people coming from different backgrounds. So what is very rewarding for me is to be have a small part in these people, in these students achieving their potential.
yeah.
You know, that's very rewarding. If I have been able to help them in doing that, that's priceless, actually.
So when you talk about entrance exams, you're talking about exams. What kind of exams are these two?
So all these are mostly graduate level exams. So there
Right.
are different competitive exams for bank jobs, for MBA entrance, of course, then for state level government jobs, things like that.
Yeah. And in terms of, the early years, especially when you were maybe just finding your feet and, perhaps think it wasn't so clear cut how well your business was going to do. What were the biggest setbacks that you experienced in those days?
Um, Setbacks. I suppose financial, I mean, of course, it was definitely a very rocky journey. It still is. And the last year hasn't been kind to us because of the pandemic. So financially, it's been a roller coaster. So, no doubt about it. Apart from financial and the pandemic setback, which was, of course, true for so many people. I'm going to say, touch wood. I mean, we've been blessed. It's been a happy journey. Psychologically, when financial things apart, I'm not saying that but it was never our objective to be rolling in money. That's not why we started it.
Yeah.
So what our objectives were to start the business: one, to do something which we can be passionate about, that we believe in, and two, to maintain a work-life balance, three, to be in a city which allows you some time, some space, some greenery, quiet life. All those things we've been blessed that we have actually been able to achieve. So setbacks, I wouldn't say.
And of all the places you could have gone to in India, tell me why you picked Bhopal.
One was because we didn't have that much of a choice. As I told you, we took a franchise, okay, of a brand, and the brand gives franchise only one person in one city. So by the time in 2004 we made this decision, all the big cities were anyway taken up, and in any case, we didn't have the kind of money to spend that is required to set up a business in big cities like Bombay or a Delhi. And we had a language restriction. We were not able, we had to be operating in the Hindi English speaking belt only, because we don't know the other languages. So out of the choices that we had at that time, business wise, Bhopal made a lot of sense in terms of the market. And the more romantic reason is we came here before we made the final decision. We visited Bhopal, and we just fell in love at first sight, because there were the lakes and there was greenery and it was serene, quiet. Of course, that's 15 years ago. Things are not the same anymore, but it was the kind of city that I wanted to settle in.
Yeah.
So that's why I took this.
And of course, since then you've had children, and you've got your sort of work-life balance that you wanted. What's been the hardest thing for you in this journey, in this new way of living?
Um, Hardest thing. Well, for one, working with your husband has its own challenges, Rohini. It isn't that easy, because you bring all your work problems. There is no distinction really between your work life and your personal life many times. Especially during the pandemic, when we were working from home, it was not easy to be working with a co-director who's also the husband, who's also the father of children. So that has its own challenges. It's been, I think, it's taken us a few years to sort of find out a formula how to manage that. In our initial years, we were fighting like cats and dogs most of the time. It was terrible. So that is one thing, but we have touched wood, we tried to smoothen that out a little bit. So that was difficult. Then, of course, I mean, all said and done, work-life balance is fine. But when you have young children, it has its own challenges how to manage that with work. Because when you are working in your own business, Rohini, it's not an 8-hour job or a 10-hour job. It's a 24/7 job. So you're always there for your work, but you also have the babies who need you. So it wasn't all that easy. That's also difficult.
Yeah.
So yeah, those two things.
Yeah. And if somebody listening to this would be considering going into business with their partner or husband or spouse, what advice would you give them? How do you deal with those difficult moments when maybe you disagree, or you're both stressed and things are not going so well? I mean, what's the formula that worked for you?
Oh, hindsight is such a wonderful thing, Rohini. You can sound so wise in hindsight. It's not as if I haven't made mistakes, but yeah, now I can always say, yeah, I can give advice to anyone. Working with your partner, you have to be, first of all, very, very, like I said, we've been talking for years about doing this. We were both interested in doing this. My husband had actually dabbled in this a little bit even before he got married, even before his MBA. So he had a working understanding of this. So the very first thing is, it cannot be this one fine day you decide, okay, let's do something together. It has to be an idea that you both are separately, individually, very, very keen on. That's the one thing. And the second thing is, to whatever extent possible, do have a separation of your roles. whatever extent. I mean, you can't be doing everything, literally everything together. There has to be, I think it makes sense for X things to be completely his territory and Y things to be my territory. And then there should not be any interference.
Yeah.
That's the second. And you have to be starting off as equal partners. I think that was very important. We were equal. There was mutual respect. Um, Strange thing is that, you know, for the first 10 years of our job, 10 years, nobody in among our students knew that we were married,
Oh,
because we kept it very professional. I don't take my husband's surname, so we didn't even let that be evident to our students. Our staff members knew. So you have to keep things very professional. I suppose that's the advice. But the first and foremost advice is, be very clear you are starting the business for the right reasons, not because you just want to do something together, but because it's an idea where you have complementary skills. You bring something and the other person brings something completely different. Okay, so that there is no clashing over this, doing the same kind of work. You do separate things together.
yeah. And then presumably you have to respect that, the other person knows what they're doing
Completely,
and not
completely. You
try
have
and
to
second
respect, no
guess.
interference. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And in terms of, it obviously being a franchise, which is a little bit different to being it completely being your business. So to what
Yeah.
extent does the franchisor, sort of,
It's a
what,
ready-made idea. It's a ready-made idea. A lot of the infrastructure is ready-made for us. So the
yeah,
whatever intellectual property that we use is ready-made. And we also, like I told you, we have wonderful mentors who are our franchise partners. So yes, it's different from starting a business completely on your own. I agree.
so it's a little bit lower risk, but
I
the,
would agree
but
with that.
the do you find it limits you in terms of the things you'd like to do, or is your franchisor quite open to
Oh,
innovation?
they are wonderful people, really, Rohini. I do
Yeah,
agree. Sometimes it can limit, as in with any other partnership, there can be clashes, but we've been very, very lucky that ways. So our mentors are also alumni of my management institute, and we just share. They're like elder brothers for us. So we share a wonderful personal relationship and professional relationship. But that is something that we were able to discover even before we finalized on the plan. When we met them, and we liked them so much, and we found that they're on the same page as we were. And that's why we went ahead with the idea, because we could see, we discussed all the things that we wanted to do,
yeah.
and they were completely accepting to all of those ideas, and they have given wonderful advice to us over the years.
Yes. And tell me, if you kind of think back on how where you were as maybe a 16, 17-year-old when you were just beginning to kind of look around and think about what you were going to do with your life, if you had to go back in time and, you know, be a mentor to your younger self, what would you say to the younger Shahana?
I don't know if I thought that seriously about my career when I was 16, because as I said, I was very okay with just following whatever my parents guided me on. So yeah, to my younger self, I would say the same thing, that you have to try to discover yourself. The earlier you discover yourself in terms of what you like and what you don't like, and the earlier you can just have a I don't care attitude to the opinions of other people, the better, the smoother your life will be. And it's not that easy to say I don't care. We try to pretend that we don't care, but we do care a lot about the opinions that people have about each other. That's a very difficult thing to let go of. So the earlier, my husband has now not been born with that attitude. He didn't have it from birth. So it's his life to that extent has been easier, I would say.
So
And he has
what
had he's not had an easy childhood, but then he had this I don't care attitude genuinely. So that's helped him.
was it sort of a combination of, I don't really care, but also knowing very, very strongly what
What
he
you
was
like.
all
You
about?
have to have substance. Yeah, you can't say
Yeah,
I don't care and not have substance in your
yeah,
life. It
yeah,
has to be both of the things. Yeah,
yeah.
sure.
So it feels like, finding your husband at the point in time that you did was a very pivotal thing for you.
Serendipity.
Serendipity, but it's not just having somebody who is willing to listen to you when you are unhappy, but to give you the space and the support for you to get clear on what it is you really want, rather than
Absolutely.
Because so many times, I come across people and they have a long list of things they're very unhappy about, but because they don't really know what they actually want, they're not brave enough to walk
Yes.
away from it.
Yes, he helped me on that path of discovery. You're very right. There are a lot of people who very quickly realize what they don't like, but to figure out what you like is more difficult. You're right.
Yes,
And
yes.
he helped me on this path.
And obviously, your husband, we should probably get him on this
He's
podcast.
not at home.
Not today,
Yeah.
not today. Today's
Yeah.
your time. But I'm just thinking
Thank you.
that he obviously was a support for you. But was there anybody else, that you can look at and say that this person really inspired me, or was my role model, and gave me the courage maybe to go and do this? Was there any such person for you?
No, apart from the mentors that I talked about who really supported, there was just my husband. Everybody else, we faced opposition. My parents were dead against the idea because, as I said, they just did not have any idea about, and what one doesn't know about one fears. So for them, it had been a very, unidimensional life. They worked hard all their lives for 40 years, so they didn't know anything else. They were very afraid for me. So we faced opposition from family, from our friends. We had sort of bewilderment from friends. They our well wishers. I don't think anybody had given us a very strong thumbs up at that time, because our friends were also the same age as we were. We were all earning well at that time. We were earning, unlike right now, we were earning more than we spent. We had no mortgages, we had no loans, we had no children, school fees to worry about, college fees. So we were living the high life, partying, earning well. They couldn't understand how you could give it up, and we didn't. And probably some people might have thought we gave up pretty easily. It was just after 2 years of working that I gave up, so to say. Gave up, I don't think I gave up, but that's what some of them felt. So apart from my husband, really, I can't think of anybody else. It was just him.
Yeah, and there's obviously this very broadly kind of believed myth that that it's choice between making money and doing good. So if you want to do something good, if you want to make a difference, then you've got to give up the idea of making money. Do you think that's true? Has that been your experience? It does have to be one or the other.
What is making money is very subjective, you see, Rohini. I mean, one can always question how much money. I'm probably earning more than somebody, but I'm also earning less than somebody. So for somebody money is important, you have to just prioritize in your life what is important. Obviously money is important, but is it the most important thing for me? Certainly not.
Mm.
But there is a certain lifestyle that I do want to maintain for me and for my children, and I do. And I we when we started out with the firm conviction that we can make that kind of money. That's enough for us. Whatever gives you satisfaction, whatever money is needed to give you satisfaction, you have to try to get to make that. And yes, it is possible. So to answer your question, is it possible to make the money that you want with your passion? I would say not only possible, it's probably the most easiest way. Because when you're stuck in a job that you don't want to, then you'll probably not be successful at it.
Yeah.
You'll
Yeah.
probably end up burning out, or not making a success out of it. So it works both ways. When you do something you love, you do it successfully, and then you also make money out of it.
Yeah. I I want to move to this current pandemic and what's been happening, in the world, and in particular young people for whom this is perhaps more difficult than even for people like us. What's been your experience? What are the young people that you're working with? What are they
So
feeling?
the youngsters, and one of the reasons I love my job is because it keeps you young. I feel very young because I talk every day to youngsters, 18 years old to 22 years old. So it's lovely to talk to them, and it gives you a perspective of what's changing in the world. So the pandemic was obviously very tough for everybody, particularly in the cities that I live in, Rohini. Not only is it a tier 2 city, I keep calling it tier 2, but we do get students who come from even smaller villages and cities to study in Bhopal or in Indore, where we have our centers. These are students who did not have a laptop or a smartphone or a data connection, and almost overnight they were expected to shift to online classes for their studies. Their colleges were shut, their sorry, just give me one minute. Colleges were shut, hostels were shut, and apart from that, they had no clarity on when the exams will be actually scheduled. Everything was thrown into disarray, and they were expected to have all this gadgetry to learn. And it's been about a year, Rohini. Some of them are still not very comfortable. You know, if one has to think and answer, how are online classes different from physical classes? What's the difference? If it's like I'm talking to you right now, is perhaps the same thing as you and me sitting face to face. What's the difference? But there is a difference. It all depends on your comfort and your familiarity with the medium. So for students who didn't have a smartphone or a laptop and have poor connectivity, okay, they share a room with their siblings. They probably live in a place where they don't have a private corner to study in. In such challenging times, the pandemic was very rough on them, really.
Yeah.
So
And have things returned a bit more back to normal?
things are thankfully returning, touch wood, returning to normal, certainly. Um, but but it has, I have also seen for many of the students, their parents, one of the parents lost a job, and so my students, some of them were forced to discontinue their studies and help out in their family business or take up whatever job they can. So it's not going to be have an elastic recovery that, you know, if it's taken 6 months of slum, then within the next 6 months things will be back to normal. It will not be that kind of a mathematical, you know, proportion, but hopefully we will recover. But the students are also very resilient, I would say.
Yeah.
Probably youngsters are going to probably handle the pandemic better than we will, because they are resilient and they're optimistic. For us, this is going to last in our memories for much longer.
That's very true. And I think it goes back to the point you made earlier that when you're young, you're willing to experiment. You have fewer things to lose, you know, you
Yeah,
start from there.
that's right.
But in terms of the content of what you're teaching, has it been informed or slightly subtly, you know, influenced by what's happening with the pandemic, in terms of how you get these young people to think about their future?
We do end up, yes. What happens is that we have spent much more time in counseling the students than we used to. The content of what is needed for the various entrance exams hasn't substantially changed. So we do have to still cover that. But we have now far many more sessions one-on-one with the students, where we're just sitting with them and counseling them on you know, their future steps and how they have to have a positive outlook and all that. For just to give you an example, for the students who are right now appearing in their class 12 exams in India, so for many of the exams have got postponed by 4 months, and that creates a lot of, you know how important 12th board exams are in our country.
Hmm.
They have been studying for the last 2 years, and the kind of fatigue sets in. And so we spend a lot of time in just talking to the students, keeping their spirits up, making sure that they are able to still persevere and study, things like that. So to that extent, yes, content has changed.
And can you share with me, you know, a story of a particular student who you remember because of how they were helped by, you know, the training you provide and the interactions that you've given? Can you give us an
Yeah,
example?
sure. I remember one always has these few students whom you never forget. So in our very first year of operation, this was in 2005. I was 26 years old. Okay. I dressed in jeans and t-shirt, and hopefully I looked like a college student. As in, my point is, I did not look particularly, you know, what can I say? Somebody was very respectable. I just looked like just another one of them. In those days, in 2005, so we had, in our first year, we got 60 students who joined us. And I remember each of those 60 students, because I find, hey, they actually had faith in me. It was just wonderful. Nobody knew me, nobody knew us in Bhopal, so they had faith in us. Out of them, there was one student, his name was Vikram. His father used to sell fruits and vegetables on a push cart in a village in Rajasthan. Okay. This is a boy, you keep hearing about these in movies. He literally used to study under the lamplight on the main road because there was no electricity connection in his house. From that small village in Rajasthan, he struggled. He taught himself to read English by watching movies, Hollywood movies, and whatever material he could lay his hands on. He borrowed books from friends and so on. And he literally clawed his way through school. And he got admission in an engineering college in Bhopal, which is how he came to meet us. And when he met us, he would always carry a dictionary with him. And every time he had to speak a sentence, he was very fastidious that I'm going to speak it completely in English, because he had kind of made it a challenge for himself to become fluent in the language. I'm not demeaning the fact that if somebody speaks Hindi fluently, there's nothing wrong in that at all. But it was just one of the challenges for him. He was studying in an engineering college. He needed to have familiarity with the language. And he had such big and clear dreams. Forget about me at having a vision of what I want to do after marriage. This was a boy, he was 20 years old, and he was very clear that what he wanted to do back in his village, because he wanted to do something for his village. He was very clear, and he wanted to do an MBA for all the right reasons. He went and did his MBA in a college that specializes in rural management. And when he got the admission, and that was probably, such a high when you're just 26 years old and a boy comes up to you, getting the admission, you've been with him all through that journey. He was brilliant in quantitative aptitude questions, but communication and language were his weak spots, and we would spend hours with that dictionary. And he came to us when he got the admission, and very brokenly said how he was never going to forget us. And I said the same, I'm not going to forget you, because the thing with teaching students is they learn from you, but you learn so much from them.
Yes.
It was such a humbling experience.
And so that was quite a while ago. Have you stayed in touch with Vikram?
We are, because at that time, when Facebook, I first joined into Facebook, the first thing I did was I just made friends with all these ex-students. So he is now doing very well for himself. He did manage to help out his father's family, the entire family in his village, but now he's moved on, is now settled in the Middle East, doing very well for himself.
Wow, that's such a great story. And I love that, from what I understood, your training is not just helping them get through an exam, it's teaching them certain life skills, right?
It is having confidence in yourself, life skills, the ability to have the discipline to prepare for any challenge, so many things. And you just get involved. Some of the students share such personal stories with us about their difficulties, and you willy-nilly you do get involved, and you try to help them out in that way by whatever counseling you can do.
Yeah. So if you had to sort of ask for support or encouragement or whatever it is to help you and your team to help more people, what would that be? What is it that you need today to reach more people like Vikram to make a difference to their lives?
What do I need from whom?
From the universe, from people. If you had a wish list, I don't know if you do, maybe you feel you're already doing as much as you need to, but if you felt like that this is what is stopping me from making an even bigger impact, what is that? Is there something that's stopping you from making a bigger impact today?
I'm a very small person in the sense that I don't think I have that big a vision. I'll be very honest with you. I don't have a very big professional vision. So I have a very small center of influence, and in that I just want to do a good job. So in terms of the support from other people, I think that in general, if the perception changes about, even among our students, the only thing is that the awareness about what all is possible after your post-graduation or graduation, it's still somewhat limited. They still get enamored by, the money factor. One of the things that I have always objected to is that when I talk about institutes like mine, many times the headlines that appear in the news are about this person getting this fat package from campus. And that sets sometimes unnatural aspirations in the mindsets in the minds of our students. They just look at the money and they have no idea about what it entails to get that money, what kind of work is needed to get that money. There has to be something more than money that is promoted from courses such as mine. I would certainly like that. I want people to join these institutes for the right reasons and not just for the money.
I
So
agree.
awareness about that, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so true. It's there's a lot of myths around money, isn't there? You know, there's a scarcity mindset, and I suppose if you're coming from a very poor family, then that's to be
It is
expected.
it is
Yeah.
important. I'm not denying it, but you cannot be blinkered and only look at that. That is my problem. There have to be the other things. And even if it is money, there has to you have to realize that there is a choice how to make that money. You
Yeah.
do not have to, like I did, jump at the first job that comes your way, thinking that, oh, this is as good as it gets. I didn't know any better,
Yeah.
right? So that kind of awareness should be increased,
Yeah.
that you
And,
always have choices.
and in terms of, see, I always feel that, people have this thing about being called ordinary, that, being ordinary is almost like an insult. But my feeling is that, being ordinary gives you the chance to experiment and explore things without people
Yeah.
having lots of expectations.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Yeah. And it doesn't stop ordinary people from creating extraordinary things in their life. Now, I feel what you've created is quite extraordinary, especially when you think about all the people who went down the same path as you and what they've created. If you look at your own life, what would you see? What would be your definition of an extraordinary life?
An extraordinary life for me is the one in which you have never had to face a moment of self-doubt in your abilities. That is extraordinary for me. Yeah, and I know that extraordinary also means being able to make a difference in the lives of other people in some positive way. If you are able to do that, and at the end of life, if you are able to find peace, you go, what I love, touch wood, is that most of the time when I go to bed, I go there with I go to bed with a feeling of peace. I'm at peace with myself,
Yeah,
which is such a rarity. I think more than happiness, more than success, having peace of mind.
yeah,
So an extraordinary life would be one where you can find that as soon as possible. You find peace, you eliminate self-doubt, and hopefully you're able to inspire other people in some ways.
yeah. Now, Shahana, there's other things that I know you do very well, which we haven't even talked about, which is, your writing and stuff like that. Does that fit into, what you do now? Can you use that in some way to influence more people, to make that difference that you talked about?
For me, writing is more an outlet. It's my I would say Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde syndrome. So professionally, I have to be Dr. Jekyll. I have to be very proper and make sure that if not a role model, I certainly don't say something which is not an anti-role model. But when I write, I take out all my wickedness and my naughtiness and my immaturity in that. So for me, it's an outlet. How to use it I have used it professionally, of course. At some point, I was also involved in writing a lot of content which we use for our classes. So I do use that, but that I don't enjoy that much. I do it because of professional reasons.
Hmm.
But what you are calling as writing, which is just frivolous stuff, so that's just fun. It's just fun.
Frivolous, you say, but it always makes me laugh. That's always a good thing.
So it's
So,
frivolous, right? We laugh at frivolous things.
laughter is such a for me, this pandemic, I think I've got through it by really just finding things that made me laugh. So, I would say it's a gift if you can do that for people. So I'm sort of I want to, kind of wrap up this conversation, and I want to ask you, and you touched upon this briefly earlier, that I want you to imagine that, many years from now, and you've been in this training business, maybe doing more stuff as well. But you've come to a point where you've done enough and your time has come to say goodbye to this world. How would you like people to remember you? What kind of legacy would you like to feel that you've left behind?
You know what you said, if I have been able to make you laugh, Rohini, it's so fulfilling for me. So if at the end of my life, if they can be somebody who says that, hey, I'm going to miss her, she used to make me laugh, that will make me feel wonderful. I don't know about anything else. I think there's a little bit of a closet stand-up comedian in me. I like to make people laugh, all said and that will be good enough. She was
Well,
good for a laugh.
that sounds like a very worthy thing to do, and I hope you do it. Based on your writing, I think you have
So
it.
too.
Yeah,
I have developed a bit of a writer's block for the last 2-3 months, but yeah, I should get back to it. I will get
Shahana,
back to it.
thank you so much. And I think before we say goodbye to you, I want to ask you: is there, if you were to sort of give people who may be like like you were in your early 20s, where you're torn between what is expected of you and what your heart is telling you want to do, how would you suggest to them that they find the path for them? What would be your advice?
Your heart has to be in it, but there's one more thing. You have to be good at it also, Rohini. It's not enough. I mean, I think I would love to be a brilliant singer or dancer. I would really, in some life, it's my fantasy, but I don't do those things very well. So my heart was in what I'm doing right now, but I also knew with 100% confidence that I'm going to be good at it. I do have the skills. So that's also important. So you cannot make unrealistic dreams. Once you realize where your heart is and what you're good at, after that, as happened with me, it will make sense for you to find somebody that you can talk it out with. You have to, find some friend, guide, philosopher in your life, preferably, or take the help of counselors or coaches. Just don't keep it bottled up inside you. These days, we didn't have this kind of person at all, but now you have career coaches and you have people like you who are there to help people find themselves. So you have to be very, very open to sharing all your anxieties and doubts with somebody who's professionally qualified to give you the right direction. So you do that, and do that as soon as possible. Don't hesitate. Don't wait too long.
Yeah. So you said, not just things that you love, but you need to be good at it.
You need to have some way to prove it to yourself that you're good at it.
Yeah. And just, going back to your story, did you actually teach before? Did you have
I
experience?
did. I did.
I
I
see.
did. I did teach, and just to prove to myself that I'm going to be good at it. Of course, like many of us, one used to teach. When I was younger, obviously I used to teach neighbors' kids and all that. All those things happened, but I also took it up in a professional way before I decided, and I looked at the feedback that I got from the students. I evaluated myself, and it was, of course, starting a business, it was not just about being a teacher, but having the business head for it. And I thought that I would be able to do that. There's certain aspects of business that I'm very good at, like the operations part, the planning part.
Yeah.
So I did evaluate all that.
Yeah. No, I love that. So, the finding that sweet spot between things that you love and things you're good at. But I think for me, there's a third bit that comes in also, it sort of matches your values and what you really want.
Oh yes, one of the things which did not work out for me in my workplace was that the values did not match.
Mm.
And when I met my mentors, when we met, I said, look, I'm not going to move an inch from these set of values. And I have them printed on a paper, and I have framed it, and I have kept it in my office, that these are the things that I'm never, ever going to compromise on. That was such an important thing for me.
Yeah. And do you mind sharing with us what are those, maybe not all of them, but what's been the.
So we believe in complete transparency. We were very, very clear. In my office, we all have an open floor plan. So I don't have a cabin. I have a cubicle like everybody else. All our discussions with all our staff members happen in the open. Our appraisals happen in the open. In terms of a commitment to the students or to the customers or the clients, if you make a commitment, you will not step down from it an inch. So, and many of these ethics and values came to the test during the pandemic. It was not easy to keep up to all of them,
Yeah.
but we tried our best. And of course, the usual ones, honesty, but transparency was very important for me.
Yeah.
Transparency. And you can say our motto is that if we commit 100 to a student, we try to give 110, but not 99. So always give more than what you commit.
I love that. Thank you so much, Shahana. I wish you
Oh,
and
it
your
was such a
husband
pleasure. This has been
all
such an
very
ego
well.
trip.
Yeah, it's been lovely, and I can't believe that it's already been almost an hour. But thank you so much, and wish you all the best. And
Thank you.
yeah, we'll speak again very soon.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It was totally a pleasure, Rohini.
Thank you, Shahana.
Okay.